Hey, this is Liz Bentley, and today we are doing a special interview with one of my favorite people, Josh McAdam, in honor of Men's Health Month with Liz Bentley Associates. So, Josh and I have known each other for about a year and a half now, but it feels like a lot longer than that. He grew up in Oakland and went to college at Cal Berkeley, where he was a Division I soccer player, which near and dear to my heart. And then went from there to UCLA Law School, was a lawyer for a little while in LA, then migrated up to Northern California, where he did a variety of things. He owns some bars, he owns some real estate up in Oregon, and also is a top-notch real estate broker, as well as a phenomenal athlete still, and a dad to two of the most adorable children I think I've ever seen, as well as having an amazing wife. So Josh is a rock star and pretty incredible, but he's had quite a journey in life, as we all have, to get to all these amazing places. And he has an incredible story. And he's one of the main reasons, which is one of the main reasons I picked Josh as our first interview this month. So Josh, you and I talk about, men all the time, and a lot of the challenges and issues that men face today, and the good things and great things that they have in their life right now, and the hard things and the struggles that men have. And, across the country, we're definitely seeing a lot of struggle. Number one, we have all these mass shootings, and 98%, and that's probably generous, are caused by men. The mass shootings are caused by men. Men are contributing to a lot of the violence in the country, and are not only participate in the majority of the violent crimes, but also are subject to the majority of the violent crimes. In fact, 90% of the crimes are created by men, and almost 80% are the men are the victims. So really interesting stuff we're seeing across the board, and a lot more stats where that came from. So just to lay some of the groundwork on some of the struggle that we're seeing men have, and what's going on. So to start with our interview, Josh, I always like to go back to what we call the imprinting years, which are the first 10 years of your life, and where a lot of your foundation is formed. And it's where all of your emotional and mental development starts. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your imprinting years. You grew up in Oakland in some pretty tough neighborhoods, in some really pretty hard circumstances. And I wanted to hear a little bit about that time in your life, and what you learned about being a man.
Yeah, so my imprinting years, I grew up in a very, in the inner city. I was one of the only white kids in my neighborhood, and stuck out like a sore thumb, obviously.
Yeah.
That didn't help me, right? And it was just.
Let me ask a question about that. Were you aware right away that you were really different because you were the white kid, and that was really scary?
Yeah, it was scary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just because I was always sort of having to do more to try to fit in with my friends and sort of the environment, right? And I obviously had a different background. My parents sort of, were obviously they stood out in the neighborhood as well, and it wasn't all bad at all. It was great. It really was a wonderful place to live in certain ways, but it was also, as I got older, sort of in the sort of, call it 10, 11, 12, sort of those early teenage years, really violent. Yeah,
Right.
a lot of violence.
And what kind of things were you worried about on a daily basis?
Just like taking the bus to school and not having somebody take my shoes or my jacket.
Right.
I would see like crazy violent fights all the time,
On the bus, or just all over?
All over. The
Right.
bus was just confined. So it was just, you couldn't run on the bus, right?
Right. Did you have a lot of circumstances where you were?
I had a lot of circumstances where,
Mm-hmm.
the idea was to sort of, to always be prepared, to always be ready to fight for any reason whatsoever.
Right.
At the drop of a dime,
At what age do you think you learned that you had to be ready to fight no matter?
I mean, probably like 10, 11.
Okay.
That zone. And before that, we were like, all of our sort of communication as kids was all like slapboxing and grappling and all this sort of stuff, right?
Very physical.
Yeah, we were just getting into all sorts of trouble. We were always obviously played a lot of sports, a lot of basketball, and in the course of just playing sports or physical, and you get the fights and altercations and things, and just to never back down, right, from any sort of physical challenge, because the minute you did, you were just in victimville, you know, you were just, you know, you sort of went into that coward category, and that was not really the category you wanted to be in, right?
Right. And so was that a big fear to not fall into the coward category?
Oh,
to make
yeah.
sure you were going to be, because what happened to the kids who fell into the coward category?
Oh, was they were just, you know, they had no rights.
Right.
I mean, as boys, right? Like you had no respect, you had no value.
Right. So how did you learn that? How did you know not to fall into the category? Is that something you got from your dad, or is that something?
Yeah, I paid attention. My dad was always also very like, he was very straightforward about sort of how to assert myself, and he never urged me not to fight back. He was always like, look, like, you know, you gotta lay it down. Like this is where you're at, and this is the things you gotta do. And you know, don't let it treat you, you know, don't let it, the minute he always sort of established real boundaries for me. He had them himself. He was a, you know, very big physical dude, and certainly wasn't, you know, afraid of conflict. So you know, I think I had grew up around a lot of conflict with him too. It's just his general personality. I think inherently, you know, we are who we are, we're born, right? And some people are born certain ways. I feel like I was always sort of okay with conflict.
Right. So something you told me I thought was really interesting that your dad taught you was to never cross the street. If you were coming in, you know, if you were walking down the sidewalk and coming up against some tough guys who you might be afraid of, and your instinct would be to cross the street to avoid them, but to not do that, to stay and just keep your path, and just tell me why, our audience why that was so important to like not cross the street.
Yeah, I mean, that was just always sort of his mantra, you know?
Yeah.
It was never sort of he didn't, those ideas like to sort of, you know, to avoid, or it wasn't really an option, I feel like, for him. Like, he always sort of instilled that in me, you know, as a kid. And I think, you know, I think that all of those things with him, even though he was a bit of a disaster as a parent in a lot of ways, I think having him there in those years navigate that was crucial. And of course, like I you know, I got guidance, and I found mentors and people who I looked up to, who I would, you know, look at their behavior and mimic it, and pieces of this and that, right?
But what were real quality things you got from male mentors?
It depends on sort of the timeline, right? But when I was young and in Oakland, it was about being fearless. It was about being, you know, sort of overcoming that fear to really, how could I, you know, avoid harm by sort of projecting a certain type of masculinity out to the world, such that I wouldn't be, you know, thrown again to that victim category, which was like really the place where you were nobody, you know. Nobody.
So you learned from your dad to be tough and how to stand your ground, not be afraid of the fight, you know, be fearless, as you said. What were some of the things that were hard that you didn't learn from your dad, or you learned what not to do from your dad? What were some of the things where, you know, he didn't really role model things for you?
That list is too long to go into this podcast or into this interview, but yeah, I mean, he was an alcoholic. He was just an incredibly, you know, he wasn't dependable as a kid, right? And you're a kid, that's what you want. You want dependability, you want structure, you want routine, you want all these things, right? That I sort of get now, obviously, because I'm a father now, and I see my own kids and the kinds of things that they need. And we didn't have any of that, right? So it was always sort of a haphazard. I never knew what dad I was going to get. Was going to get the drunk dad who, you know, who would act a certain way, or would I get the dad who would actually give me, you know, life lessons and pay attention and listen and want to know what I had to say or whatever, right? Connect. And of course, like, you know, I was in a constant state of not knowing what I was going to get. Like, so you're like constantly kind of on adrenaline mode. You don't, you know, when you're a kid, it's like a fight or flight kind of vibe in your own house. Not exactly sort of the stability you're looking for as a thing.
Well, your dad also was a veteran from Vietnam.
Yeah, he was a Marine.
You know, again, he's another kind of male story, because a lot of the men that came back from war had a lot of struggle and a lot of depression, a lot of post-traumatic syndrome, and no real outlets, right?
Yeah, he's now actually label, he has a label as 100%
Mhm.
disability.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
he didn't get to that till way later in life. Um,
So Josh, in your right, so then, and so he was also a victim of a lot of not having the support, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do, turn to alcoholism, did, and all of those things that we see that where men aren't getting the help that they need.
right.
When coming out of circumstances like that, unfortunately, he fell in that category, which was hard for you and your mom and your family. And what's extraordinary about, there's so many, as I always say, there's so many extraordinary things about you, but one, it just, I think is interesting for our audience to hear is that it was so violent in your childhood that you saw someone murdered, friend murdered, was it? Yes. And also your best friend from your childhood is now in prison for life for
One of
murder.
them,
And yeah, one of them. Yeah. And just to the reality of what you were up against every day, and survival as a male was pretty intense.
yeah.
So let's go forward into, how do you, a guy like you, and I started giving you this extraordinary background, and clearly you got your way out of there and have done so many incredible things with your life and are starting a life with your family now. Tell me about how you have brought, this learning to your life now and how it shows up in your life as a dad and as a man. And what does that all mean? What does it mean to be a man in today's world?
It's confusing, right?
Yeah.
I think, for my own part, and this is something I work a lot with you, obviously. I think I started out my life as a father as sort of trying my best to not be like my own father, right?
Yeah.
I think I've sort of shifted that to trying to be a father I want to be, a lot different than trying to avoid being like my own dad, because we have a lot of things, right? I notice a lot of things in myself that are like him, sort of come up. And
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, that was
Yeah.
like I sounded like him or I looked like him,
Yeah.
even though we don't, we were not really in touch for over a decade, at least more, 15 years. It's interesting, right? How, you are who you are and how close you are to those people who brought you into the world. But yeah, I think being a man and being a father is really complex, because I feel like there's an incredible amount of expectation, the world that I'm in now anyway, to sort of perform as a man and do all the things that men are supposed to do, provide and be strong and protect and all of those things that you're supposed to do for your family. But then on the flip side, you're also meant to be perfectly sensitive and connect emotionally and listen in a way that, at least for relationship between me and my wife, she wants me to listen like one of her friends listens to her, communicates with her, right? And we're so different, right? I'm always trying to like get to a problem, and I see something that's bothering her, or thing that's coming up sort of over and over again. I'm trying to solve it, trying to offer whatever tools I think are great for her to solve it, or tools that I would use if I was feeling the same way. And that's typically not what she wants to, how she wants to engage. She just wants me to sort of listen and hear it out, and go back and forth and whatever. And it's just such a different way of solving problems, or of communicating, or of experiencing these emotional things or whatever, right? When things come up for me, I want to solve them and move on. I'm sure there's all kinds of suppressed stuff too, but that's sort of how I think many men feel, they're trying to.
Yeah, and I think the pressure, like you said, of being a provider, being a protector, and kind of being the fearlessness. When do you get to be afraid?
Yeah, no, you
I mean,
don't.
we're not under the assumption that men don't have fears. They're human beings and they've got to have fears. So when do you get to be afraid? I mean, I automatically go towards thinking, is this why the suicide rate is so high? That when you get so afraid that your only choice is to just end your life because you don't know what else to do. I mean, that might be a dramatic leap, but where's the room for being afraid? Where's the room for being scared?
I mean, there's so many things, right? Like talk about male suicide. Like I feel like, there's the fear, there's sort of when you can be vulnerable, or who you're able to talk to, how you're able to be vulnerable today. And right, the expectation of strength, the expectation of performance. Like I feel like men are just expected to perform.
Right.
And when you don't, you're a failure, or you're a loser. which is
Right.
the harshest thing you can be in our society. Is a loser.
Right, like kind of like this, the category you talked about as a child, where you don't want to be the victimhood, because then you're the loser. And you said, then you have no choice. Then you have no,
You're no one.
then you have no power. You're no one. You're a no
No
one.
one. As a man,
If you become a loser, then you're a
yeah,
no one.
if you're a loser, and whatever that means in your specific sort of environment, right? Then, as a man, you're really no one, and I think there's such a lack of structure of places to go to sort of see what to do as a young man. Like what, if you don't have the family structure, if you don't have good advice, if you don't have all these things as a kid, if you don't have those building blocks, like where do you go to sort of figure out how best to navigate the world in a healthy way? How do you, establish good habits? How do you establish, discipline, all those things that you need in order to be successful?
Right.
Kind of
But
just floating.
That's the thing that jumps out to me the most, being in this industry. And I've said for so long, I'm in I call it the He Too movement, because of coaching off the guys and hearing their inner journey and hearing their real fears and thinking they've had nowhere to go, nowhere to turn with this, no one to talk to about these things they're really afraid of, nowhere to really feel their pain and express their struggle and their concern and their worry. And how do you process then if you don't, other than just getting angry or getting repressed or feeling hopeless, and being so afraid of falling into the loser category, like you said, so afraid of not being, that person. And it really feels terrifying. And it's interesting too, because we've been living in a world where we are talking so much about female struggle, right? And all the support and the help women need. And it's not that women don't. Look, we talk about it a lot in our company, and we try to support women as much as we can. But I've said to you so many times, I hear topics, I think, oh no, men struggle with this more than women do. But no one's talking about it. The New York Times is going to have a cover story on the struggle girls are having on Instagram, and they're not at all talking about that 100% of the mass shootings are caused by men. What is the, and not to talk about the mass shootings caused by men, to demonize men, to talk about why.
Right. What's going on?
Yeah. When we talk about men and we talk about their struggle, it's to say they're bad. It's not to say why.
Right.
Why are they in so much struggle? Why are they in so much pain?
Yeah, it's like we talk about men, it's like, oh, it's their fault.
Yes,
when we talk about women, it's like,
they're victims.
Yeah, they're victims.
They're victims.
It's structural. It's because of all of these different things, which is, of course, some of which is, I'm sure, true.
Yeah.
Just because, I feel like the way things are now, everything's so, I don't know, so contentious. It's so divided. It's almost like a political issue to like talk about men. It's almost like talking about men, you're somehow saying that women don't have problems.
Right.
By like recognizing that men have these specific things that, you're somehow, you're lessening all of the hardships and all of the, things that happen with.
Well, what's really interesting I've observed is that when men struggle, the first thing they go to is shame. They go to a feeling of real shame, of like, I'm bad. And it's interesting because it's like we don't get to the why. Instead of, okay, this bad thing has happened, or you're feeling this way, let's understand why and heal. We go to, you're bad, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to put you in prison, or we're going to punish you, or we're going to fire you, or we're going to demote you. We're going to take away your power. We're going to do these things that are going to put you in the powerless or the victimhood. And then we create a society where you're either a perpetrator or a victim. But men don't have to be perpetrators because they're struggling. But that's almost what's happening, right? They're either resorting to in desperation, they resort to either hurting themselves or hurting someone else, right? In the desperation, to some degree. I mean, not in all scenarios, or into the mental illness, or into the drug abuse, or into the alcoholism, like your dad did, turning to something to just feel the pain and not feel it.
It was a numb it, yeah.
I think that it's good to start talking about these topics and putting them out there to start to understand where the journey starts for men. That's not about making them bad guys, not about punishing them for feeling struggle and feeling fear and talking about the hardship they face.
I think it's important to recognize that it's okay for men and women to be different too. Like
Yes.
we don't have to be the same, you know.
So,
I think that, it's also okay to be tough. It's okay to
yeah.
okay to value those things. It doesn't mean that you're going to be abusive just
Yeah.
because you're strong, just because
Yeah.
just because you're capable of, being tough and in certain circumstances being violent doesn't mean that you're a violent person.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's almost
Yes.
like, like martial artists,
Love
right?
that.
Martial
Yes.
artists, like they can really whoop ass, right? They
Right.
can really do things if they need to, right? But they're among the most disciplined, peaceful people on earth because they're confident. Like, when I talk about my kids, I'm talking to other parents, I'm always suggesting that it's such a good idea to get these kids into, for my daughter and my son, to get them into martial arts, jujitsu or boxing or whatever. Because I feel like the more confident you are in your ability to handle yourself physically, the less likely you are to ever actually be in a fight or feel threatened.
Yeah.
Right? You feel peaceful because you're confident. I feel like there's such a push to make everybody a win. Like everybody needs to be so sensitive and so soft.
Yeah.
And it's just I think it's the wrong message for young boys.
I think to your point is we're seeing that dichotomy between one extreme or the other. And what we're trying to find for men is the middle ground where they can have duplicity. They can be strong and tough and be scared and worried, concerned, vulnerable, sad, uncertain, and at the same time certain and decisive and fast moving, and reactive. So, and just like we're saying, and we're saying the same thing we've said with women, the woman can go into the boardroom and crush it and come home and snuggle with her children. Men can do the same thing and have these dichotomies, even though they're different and different people, but they can have all different facets. And that masculinity doesn't need to shut down vulnerability. So Josh, we're gonna have to wrap. Thank you so much for joining me and starting off our Men's Month.
My pleasure. I hope it was worthwhile.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. All right. Have a good one, Josh. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.